Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Hello and welcome, and this is Cynde Meyer, and this weekly radio show is brought to you by Spirit Seeker Magazine. We are about to celebrate our 15th year in print, which is just really astonishing. 15 years ago I was very pregnant with my now 14-year-old son, and I was in Sedona, Arizona, meditating on Bell Rock. And it was really kind of a crazy time in my life. A lot of changes, 42 years old, thinking, what in the world, am I doing being pregnant at this age? And later I found out, actually, that my grandmother had her last child at age 42. But here I was, totally thrown to the wind with my life, in a little bit of shock. And while meditating on Bell Rock, I heard, start the magazine and have it in place before the child is born. And I said, excuse me, more information, please. What? Total silence. So, as I know, Spirit talks to us in funny ways, and I had a quarterly newsletter that I published, and I had 2,000 readers at that point. And I never, I wouldn't say never. The few times that I've not listened to Spirit, I've learned that that's probably not the wisest choice and the highest thought. So I listened, and Spirit Seeker was started in September of 1997 at a time when, I'd worked in publishing with women's papers. I'd been a nurse for many years. I was working on my MBA when I started on the holistic path. So here we are. We are 15 years later, still publishing strong. We have a print magazine in St. Louis, Kansas City, and most recently we've added Chicago as our sister city, and we've been there for 15 months. And in each issue of Spirit Seeker is a unique honoring of the different people who are doing this work on the front lines. And my guest that I'm about to bring on tonight, there's a wonderful article entitled 3 Keys to Navigating Life's Storms. And this is in the August issue of Spirit Seeker, which you can read at spiritseeker.com. The radio show I've been hosting for a little over 2 years in this format on Blog Talk Radio. And I must say that initially I was a little resistant to internet radio. But what I can tell you is the last, one of my most recent shows had over 2,200 listens. People listen to it as their spiritual nourishment and food because the archive shows are there for your pleasure at any time that you want any kind of an inspirational lift. All you have to do is go to spiritseeker.com, click on the Blog Talk icon in the left-hand corner, and it will take you to my Blog Talk page, and every interview that I've done for the last 2 years is archived. So with that being said, please take the time. The magazine's there. The interviews are there. There's just a lot of information there. And you can forward, you can help support the show in several ways. You can favorite the show on Blog Talk Radio. You can send an email to info@spiritseeker.com, and we'll add you to our sacrosanct email list. We send out an email letting all of our supporters know about the different interviews. You can support us on Facebook. We have a Cynde Meyer page. We have a Spirit Seeker page, all kinds of stuff. So that being said, enough announcements. Now, it is my immense pleasure to bring on the following guest, Dr. Terry Gordon. The name of his book is No Storm Lasts Forever, Transforming Suffering into Insight. This man is brilliant. He has been on the front lines of helping people from the time he was very young. He started out with a background in psychology. He then went on to become a physician specializing as a cardiologist. He has been named the American Heart Association's National Physician of the Year in 2002. He has single-handedly, and I know it's not single-handedly, but it felt that way when I felt this. He heard the call when Josh Miller, the football player, died because there were no paddles there to resuscitate his heart, which are called AEDs, the automated external defibrillators. He is spearheading a national campaign called the Josh Miller Hearts Act. I could go on and on and on. I spent the day with this book. I knew when I read the article, in the August issue of Spirit Seeker that, this was not an ordinary book, and I wanted to read it when I could be fully present. And today was the day because guess what? Tonight was the interview. So, Dr. Gordon, welcome to the Cynde Meyer Radio Show.
Thank you, Cynde. It's great being here, and I would appreciate if you'd call me Terry.
Okay.
I prefer that.
You have it. So, Terry, you know, I know that you've had these mentors that have showed up along the way.
Mm-hmm.
You have this relationship with Dr. Wayne Dyer and, you know, Kenny Loggins, on and on. But before we get to the different people who have shown up, I just really want to share with the listeners that this is not an ordinary book. This is a journal. And Terry, from what I understand, you were not really the journaling type, shall we say.
I wasn't. I never had kept a diary. What happened, Cynde, in 2009, actually our family was about to embark on a cruise with Wayne Dyer's family, the first time we were all going to get together. And 2 weeks before we were to leave on the cruise, my daughter, Maddie Rose, had just come in from Chicago where she was teaching. And, you know, it's a parent's sixth sense when you can just feel there's just something not quite right with one of your children. And Maddie Rose came up into my office, and the sadness was just dripping from her. I could just tell she was really in turmoil. And I kind of opened up the conversation by saying, "What's up, sweetie?" And she came around my desk and plopped down at my feet and put her arms up on my knees. And she said, "You know, Dad, now she's 27, still calls me Dad. She says, "You know, Dad, I always thought that the older I got and the more control I assumed over my life, the easier life would become." And then with this deep sigh and a single tear trickling down her cheek, she said, "You know, it's just not working that way. It just seems like my life is getting tougher and tougher." So I pulled her up into my arms, and I'm rocking her as I have for 27 some odd years. And I paused for a very long time because I knew what I was about to say to her would be very important. And I shared with her, I said, "You know, darling, I don't think that that's the way it's supposed to be. I think in order for us to grow, in order for us to spiritually mature during this thing we call our lifetime, we must face greater and greater obstacles, because it's only by overcoming these obstacles, these things in our way, that we grow." And I quoted from the Kabbalah, which is the ancient mystical text of Judaism, that says, "The falls of our life provide us the energy to propel us on to a higher path." It's the falls of our life. And I ended the conversation with her by saying, "You know, sweetie, we really should be thankful for the crap that comes our way." And I kissed her on the forehead and kind of left it at that. At 6:40 the next morning, I received one of the worst phone calls a parent could get. And the grave voice on the other end of the line informed me that our son Tyler, who was at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado, had been involved in a near-fatal car accident, and he had shattered his neck. And then came the dreaded words, "We believe your son is quadriplegic." Well, you worry about those things. You know, as a parent, you stay up late when the kids aren't home on time, and you worry and fret over that. But when the words come, when you finally hear those words, you can't imagine the impact. Well, I had about 20 seconds worth of denial. And then the doctor and me kicked in, so I knew exactly what was going to happen. They were getting ready to life flight him from Durango to Denver, Colorado, where he would undergo emergent neurosurgery to stabilize his neck. And within an hour, I had packed a bag and bolted from the house, speeding up to the Cleveland airport, trying to get on an overbooked flight. And it was on the way up there, Cynde, that it hit me that I had left my wife wailing. Now, my wife, I think I've seen her cry twice in our married life of 33 years. I cry at the drop of a hat, but she's a very strong woman, and she was wailing, and I suddenly realized that I had left her wailing and didn't stop to console her, but I had to get to Denver. And she understood it, but I just felt so terribly. But I got to the airport, and somehow I was fifth or sixth in line. Somehow I got a seat on this airplane, and I was in a window seat. And I was like a caged cat, because now I'm incommunicado. I didn't know if Tyler was alive, dead, brain damage, bleeding. I had no idea, you know, if the helicopter had arrived safely, gotten to Denver safely, and it was just terrible. The thoughts were banging around in my head, and there was so much chaos in my mind. It was frightening, and I felt like I was in this tornado, and it was loud, and it was whooshing, and it was wet, and I looked down the funnel, and it was just black. It was just darkness, and it was so frightening. And I remember, Cynde, praying harder than I've ever prayed in my life, and I wasn't praying for me. I was praying so that I would have the energy to help my son and be able to help my wife and my daughters and the rest of my family. And gradually, as I was praying, I found myself saying, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. And I can't tell you I heard the voice of God, but the words were crystal clear when God said, yes, you can. And I said, no, I can't do this. And he assured me again that I could. And I said, but how? And he said, well, just yesterday, you shared your truth with Maddie Rose, your daughter. You can talk the talk, but now you're going to have to live it. And I said again, but I can't do it. And he said, remember, everything is in perfect order, even this. And then the most profound thing came to me when God said, treat this as if it was something you had chosen. Now, why would I do that? Why would I choose a tragedy such as this? What possible good could come from such a life-altering calamity? What lessons could possibly be hidden in this turmoil? And why were we as a family being asked to endure this negative experience? And these were questions that would scroll through my mind for a while. But what happened is that I was given a choice. And you know, my dear friend Wayne Dyer often says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Oh. And in a nanosecond, everything changed. I had a choice between going down the same chaotic path that I'd been on before, or I had a choice of a path of peace. Now, I didn't know it was going to be peaceful, but I had this choice to make in a nanosecond, and in a nanosecond, I accepted the gift. Right. Any obstacles that we are given are gifts from the divine, because it's only by overcoming them that we get stronger. And as I navigated the storm, the challenge for me was adjusting my perception of these events enough to recognize the presence of God within the experience. And in order to do that, I had to look beyond what my mind wanted to judge as good or bad. And as soon as I made that decision, I was enveloped in this cocoon of white noise, this place of unfathomable peace that somehow let me know that everything was going to be okay, that I'd be able to do this, and I'd be able to lead my family through the storm.
Well, and you know, when you described arriving at the hospital, well, he already, it doesn't even matter. This is like not even important. But when you met his doctor, you know, before he walked into the room, you were hit with that HIPAA thing, where your son didn't want to bother you. He didn't want to bother his parents.
Well, that actually happened in Durango.
Before he was even transferred.
Before he was transferred, yes. He told the doctors not to bother it. They were getting ready to life flight him to Denver, but don't bother my parents. And guess what? They didn't.
I know. When I read that, I just went, and you are a physician, and you know about these, these rules, and you know how I was married to a doctor. I worked in that arena for a long time as a nurse, and I know there's always professional courtesy between doctors, but with these new rules, things are different. So
It's terrible. It really is.
I know it is. And so
the cop called me. The police officer called me and said, I'm not supposed to do this, but
I didn't know that.
I'm a father, and I knew I would know you would want to know about this. And then I asked to talk to the doctors. They wouldn't talk to me.
Right. Well, he was an angel. He was one of the angels.
He was.
And he understood. But, but then, the doctor that took you and looked at the MRI, and it was just like everything clicked once. Mm-hmm. And this doctor, was it 8 hours of surgery?
It was. They had to operate first from the front side of his neck to stabilize that part, and then from the back. It was a terrible injury, and he shared that with me when he asked me if I wanted to see the MRI. Of course, the father in me said I didn't want to. The doctor in me had to. And one of the things that happened on the airplane on the flight to Denver is we were enveloped in gray clouds. And I was looking out at the clouds, and I started seeing all these black speckles. And I thought it was just an optical illusion from staring at, grayness but the black speckles started to increase in frequency, and they started to agglutinate. They started to kind of come together. And after a while, I kept blinking my eyes and squeezing my eyes and forgot about it, or they went away. When I knelt down on the floor next to Dr. Ibrahim, who was a superb surgeon, very caring man.
Phenomenal.
He was showing me the MRI, and the spinal cord normally is white. And at the site of his injury, there were these black speckles that looked exactly like what I saw on the airplane. It was scary. It was really frightening, but it was exactly what I saw, not knowing that's what it was, but same speckly sort of appearance.
Well, and this child of yours came in under pretty intense circumstances. I don't know if you've ever heard of the philosophy rebirthing, but we study birth and psychological, the way it plays out. They've done studies. And cord around the neck children, which your son was double cord around the neck, Mr. Tyler, and the pregnancy was so traumatic. And your wife listening and saying, as the doctors were, listeners, what happened here, and Terry, if I don't have this right, to step in.
Okay.
While Tyler's mother was carrying him, there was a procedure done, an amniocentesis, and the needle somehow, which is one of the things that can happen when you do this procedure, the amniotic fluid leaked, and there was grave danger to the child, and of course medical advice was suggested that possibly this is not going to be a healthy child, etc. And your wife somehow, not somehow, she's listened to angels her whole life. She's very close to God. She's a very strong, sturdy person. I read this and I went, oh, my God. And so the child, the amniotic fluid filled back up. So this child already was like, woo, this is a little, the whole thing. And they've done studies with cord around the neck children, and because they were so close to death when they came in, and I hope this is okay, that, if you want me to go a different direction, but this, when I was reading the book, I thought, oh, my God, double cord around the neck? I've never known a double cord around the neck. I mean, I've known cord around the neck. They're risk takers. So when you were describing your time at camp in Kentucky where, you had to make it across this, why don't you describe that? Because and then here's your son, this rock climber, and after the accident happens, you see this person on this cliff. I mean, would you describe this? Because all I could think of is typical cord around the neck, risk taker.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Angela didn't have a leak. She had a gush. It was a riptide. The amniotic fluid, she looked like she was carrying octuplets. Not that she was fat, but she had lots of fluid in there. And in 5 minutes, it went from way out there to nothing. So, and the doctors, you're right, suggested that we abort the baby. And I usually got my way when it came to medical things. But Angela was so insistent. She said, I feel this baby fighting. I can't give up. And I said, well, honey, we can handle it. I just, want you to know that there may be problems. And gradually the fluid started coming back. And then when he was delivered, 2 true knots. The umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck, and usually that gets pulled and tightened around the neck as the baby's being delivered. Ty has always been a thrill seeker. He loves speed. He loves rock climbing. He loves motorcycles, and he just always has done these things. And especially the rock climbing, I just always cringed because I never was a risk taker like that. I was always kind of, mealy-mouthed and a little afraid. And we were at camp. It was called Camp Country Boy. Tom Boone, who was a direct descendant of Daniel Boone. So it's a really neat, very rustic camp. And there was this club that we could join if we would climb this tree about 20 feet high. And there was a log that had been placed horizontally between 2 trees with 2 ropes tied up about 3 feet above the log. And you had to walk on this log holding on to these ropes, all of which was very unstable. And I got about halfway across, and I didn't know whether I could go either way. I didn't think I was going to make it to either side, and it was frightening. And then, when Tyler had his accident, we were out in Denver, and one day I just looked up in the mountains, and they were just beckoning me to come. And I just started driving until I got to the foothills, and I went up into the mountains a little bit, and I stopped at this rest spot, and I saw something moving, and it turned out to be a rock climber. And I had never allowed myself to even look at movies or shows about rock climbers because I knew Tyler did it. My daughter Britt does it, and it just scared me to death. But I watched this guy, and he just, every movement, every motion was planned and scheduled, and then he would kind of lock himself into the face of the boulder, and he would become one with this boulder, and it was a beautiful experience, and I suddenly realized why Tyler was enthralled with that and why it excited him so much.
Right.
But so that was the experience with rock climbing.
Well, but see, that wasn't an accident. When I read that particular chapter of the book, I was like, oh my God, it was like the Zen moment where you got to see inside your son's spirit, with this adventure seeking and, how methodical and how, the whole thing. And like all of a sudden you were, when you were describing it, I thought, oh my gosh, he was inside Tyler's body climbing that side of that mountain, just like, I don't know, it's just, interesting how that all just lined up. And I love how you quote, I'm just going to read it. It says, unlike his old man, Tyler has always been fearless. Khalil Gibran's wisdom rings true to me when he says, your children are not your children. They come through you, but not from you. Mm-hmm. And you talk about how he's a daredevil, and it's just this book, listeners. By the way, Wayne Dyer says that it doesn't matter. He just reads a chapter, and it just brings this right to his heart. And the preface is by the introduction is by Dr. Wayne Dyer, and it's just beautiful. He says, I thank you, Terry, for reminding me so splendidly that an enlightened life is not about avoiding the rainstorms, but learning how to find peace and divine love in the midst of the storm. This is really a book about alchemy. It is not about waiting for the storm to pass. Instead, it is about converting the storm to inner peace and spiritual awakening, which is what you were doing with your daughter Maddie the night before this storm arrived.
Isn't that a coincidence,
It's all, it all, is divine. We know it.
It was. It was. As was, you made the comment a little bit ago, that things just don't just happen. Life has a way of preparing you. And Wayne Dyer, God love him, has been so instrumental in that from the moment I first met him. I had a patient that I walked into his room for the very first time, and this guy looked at me and said, whoa, Dr. Gordon, you're killing yourself. And I said, what? He said, you're killing yourself. I can see this marvelous energy around you, but it's all fractured. You really need to do something about this. And he said, you need to learn how to meditate, and you really need to read a couple of books by Wayne Dyer. And I did. I embraced it. After about the third visit to the hospital, I didn't listen to him the first couple of times. And so I bought Real Magic and Inspiration. And I tried to call Wayne because it impacted my life so marvelously that I tried to call him, and his secretary answered the phone. And I said, this is Dr. Gordon. I'd like to speak with Dr. Dyer, please. Well, she couldn't care less, big group. So I never got to talk to him. So about 10 years ago, I took Angela and my family, the girls and Tyler, out to Hawaii. And right before we left, my wife developed shingles, and it was a terrible case. And she was so sick the whole time we were out there and could barely get out of bed. And one morning I was feeling kind of down, and I went out and tried to meditate and couldn't, and went running on the beach. And on the way back, came back kind of kicking the sand, feeling sorry for myself. And guess who I bumped into on the beach? Wayne Dyer.
I bet it was early in the morning, wasn't it?
It was.
Because he swims that, he swims that mile swim, or I don't know if it's a mile, but he does that whole little trek every morning. He does his yoga every day. So I knew when you were describing the yoga studio where you now, have the heart defibrillator, I was like, he had back pain forever. And then all of a sudden someone said, you should try yoga. The man does yoga every single morning.
He does.
When the yoga teacher became ill, he funded him. Wayne Dyer funds so many people. When you talked about Lao Tzu so much in your book, I was like, oh, my gosh, I wonder if the two of you talked about Lao Tzu. Because, he spent, each day with one of Lao Tzu's teachings when he wrote, I forget which book it is,
Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life.
Yes.
The most marvelous book I've ever read in my life.
And when you shared Lao Tzu, I thought, I wonder what the two of them talked about during that little, but I could see the two of you just like, it was time. That was the right time.
We clicked, and I'll tell you the truth, I didn't know he lived out there. I thought he was on vacation,
funny.
So when I went up to him, I said, man, I know you're on vacation, and I don't want to bother you, but I just have to thank you for saving my life. And he said, really? Tell me about it. So for 20 minutes, he's locked into this little Terry Gordon, Wow. And so I went back. Angela was still in bed, and I went back, and I extended my hand. I said, sweetie, you might want to touch his hand. And she said, ooh, why? And I said, it just shook the hand of Dr. Wayne Dyer. Well, this miraculous recovery occurs. She's putting on makeup, and she's dragging me down the beach trying to find Wayne, as she calls it. And we finally bumped into him 3 days later, and it's history after that. But he's changed my life.
Well, and his whole start, when I interviewed him, back in 2006, his whole start came about by Bob Hyland in St. Louis, who had one of his, people on his show was going to be out of town, so he invited Wayne Dyer to fill in for him, and that is when he wrote, his Erroneous Zones, and that, when he went on the air in St. Louis, is when it hit the airwaves, and that is when his book that he'd been, selling from the trunk of his car and, et cetera, all these kids and everything, trying to support him and trying to do his best, that's when the book hit, the top bestseller charts. And so that is why he has been so generous with PBS in St. Louis, the public broadcasting, station. He has donated I don't know how many hours over the years, because he credits Bob Hyland with launching him.
Well, he is just
he's an amazing man. And, one time, we could go on and on and on, but, Wayne Dyer, of course, has been a Hay House author for a long time, and he had never taught a seminar in Hawaii, in Maui, because he thought people wouldn't come. So there's even more to the story. Okay, go back to 2006 before we're gonna go down a little journey for a moment in Cynde Meyer's life, but then we'll segue back to Wayne Dyer. What happened in 2006 is I was going really fast. I was teaching. I had students out the yazoo. I was doing the paper, and I won this drawing from Hay House Publishing for this trip. It was a cruise with Sylvia Brown and Colette Baron-Reid, I think is the person who was with her. And I won this trip. But I was going so fast that I knew I was going to win. You know how you just know? So I knew that the trip was going to be during the spring break of my daughter, and I said, listen, Katie, I said, I just need you to know that, I will be away during your spring break, if I win this trip, et cetera. And she goes, oh, my gosh, you were so ridiculous. You act like you've already won it. I said, well, I really see myself on this cruise, et cetera. And she's like, oh, whatever. She kind of poo-pooed me. But I knew it, and so I talked to the people at Hay House, and I said, when exactly is the drawing for this? What time, and are you going to email someone, or are you going to call them? And she says, no, we're going to email and the drawings in the afternoon. Just, watch your emails that afternoon. So I just knew I was going to win this. So there it is. Cynde Meyer, Spirit Seeker Magazine, won the trip. Okay, so I was going so fast teaching. I had 30 students on Friday night. I taught all day Saturday and Sunday, and Saturday night I worked a private party as a psychic. I'm also very clairvoyant because I wanted extra money to spend on my cruise, right? So here I was, single parent, all this stuff. On Sunday night, I thought I was in bed. I'd made it through the whole weekend before I was leaving for the cruise on Friday, had to finish the magazine, but I thought I've never registered for my classes. I need to tell them what classes I'm taking. So I came back downstairs, 3-level home, came back downstairs, had the papers printed out and everything, had them in my hand, and I thought, you know what? I've been inside all weekend long. It's 80 degrees. It was in March 2006, very obscure 80-degree weather. I thought, I'm just going to go out on the front porch and connect with this beautiful weekend before I go figure out what classes. I'm going to meditate on this and just get quiet. So I have the cruise papers, or not cruise, but the Hay House papers in my hand. I'm walking out the front door, and my daughter says, where are you going? I said, I'm just going out to get some fresh air. I'll be right back. And as I turned around to talk to her, I'm walking out, pulling the door with me. I missed the step, fall, get caught on that rocking chair, and I'm like, uh-oh, I snapped my ankle, fractured it, totally severed it. It was And I opened the door and I said, you know what, I think I need some help. And, of course, my kids were like, oh, you're so dramatic. And I'm like, no, I don't think so this time. And so my foot was hanging. So 10 screws and a plate later, everything's put back together again. But I was in a wheelchair in 2006 for 10 or 12 weeks. When I was first starting to walk again, I thought my daughter needed something, or rather a doctor's appointment, and she says, if you're not going to take me, Dad said he'll do it. And I said, no, and it was a female thing. And I said, I'll do it. And then I thought, when's the last time I went? I thought, I think I missed last year. And I thought, when's the last time I did a breast exam? I'm like, it was before I was in this wheelchair. So I did the breast exam, and that's when I found the breast cancer. I would never have found it had it been for the fall. But the fall stopped me from going on that cruise. I'm almost finished with the story, and this is back to Terry Gordon. But everything lined up. It's like in the minute I knew that this happened, I knew the cruise was gone. So I paid it forward, gifted it to my editor actually, and my graphic artist. Okay, so now here we go. We're now into 2009. 2008 actually. I've gone through the chemo, gone through the mastectomy, gone through all the stuff. There's another Hay House trip. Wayne Dyer in Maui. And I thought, wow, okay, I know I'm going to win this. Kid you not. I won. All expenses paid for 2, airfare to Maui. So here we go. I am staying in, the Gold Mile right there in Maui, at this amazing hotel with Wayne Dyer. Over 500 people show up. And, of course, he helps Ram Dass, so Ram Dass shows up. So let's just, and so here's Wayne Dyer. He reconciled with one of his children, that he hadn't had a relationship with. He is, so, from the heart. He his former wife he had reconciled with, it's just on and on. So when you describe that in your book, I know I digressed and went all over the place, but I know you understand what we're talking about here. These things happen. These storms happen. There's always a reason. And it wasn't an accident that the universe said, okay, Cynde Meyer, you missed that one, and you surrendered so gracefully, and you did the changes that you obviously needed to make, and then here I was, another trip, and fully present. And that's one of the things that your book talks about is it's already gone. All that's gone. How can you be in this moment present with it? And you helped your son with that.
And the rest of the family too. It's there's some that actually believe that we choose what we are to experience in a particular lifetime. Cancer being one of those choices. Interestingly, in the midst, after we got back from Colorado in October of 2009, my about 4 or 5 months later, my PSA started rising. And my father died of prostate cancer, so I've been very vigilant. And I really didn't think that I had it, but I went to the urologist anyway, and he said, we don't know what the PSA means anyway. Let's wait for another year. And I said, I think I want a biopsy. And my PSA, mind you, was still normal. It just was rising. And I remember where I was when he called me and said, Terry, I don't believe this. It came back positive. And I'll tell you the way I felt, Cynde, I felt like a little boy caught with his hand in a cookie jar. And the reason I say that is because I had allowed intermittently the stress of our circumstance to take over. And I really strongly feel that negative energy that I allowed myself to immerse myself in was what ultimately brought out that cancer.
Yeah.
And I remember just kind of looking up in the sky thinking, okay, God, obviously you think I can do this. So let's go for it. And I went through the robotic surgery and, in the midst of, and Angela and I are the only ones taking care of Tyler. So it was very difficult on her, obviously.
Right.
But it's one of those things that, again, I just looked at it as a gift. And the gift for me right then was, okay, Terry, look what you've done and let happen to you.
Yeah.
That physical affliction came from the stress that you have allowed to take over your life. So it became a gift also to me.
It's the way it works. Something, if we when we need a wake-up call, and that's what people said, like how, most recently, okay? It was in January, and I kept going back to the breast cancer and the fractured ankle. And I'm like, why am I going back to this? It's been 6 years. I've had 5 anniversaries, and I've been, home free. What is going on? And I was at my medical doctor's that day, and I said, I haven't slept in 3 nights. I said, I don't know what's going on. I said, but I keep going back to this fall that I had, and then if it weren't for the fall, I wouldn't have found the tumor. If I hadn't found the tumor, I wouldn't be here to talk about it because I had this obscure triple-negative breast cancer that they don't know a lot about it. It's the most aggressive of all the breast cancers, and not a lot of research has been put into it. But, even that, I mean, this is another story for another time, but, even that, I knew I needed to make some changes. Whenever you have something like that happen, you have to really, okay, be present, front and center. What do I need to change in my life? And cancer is basically, when you and look at Louise Hay. I mean, she would never have been helping all of us. She had written Heal Your Body, and then she was diagnosed with the cancer, and and she had to and an obscure kind of cancer, but she had to look at what part of the body got it, and what was going on, and and that's what led her. She wrote that book, and she thought, do I really believe that you can heal your body through changing your thoughts and your mind? And I interviewed her one time too, and it was just you just hear these words of wisdom. So. Okay, so here I am at the doctor, and she says, well, you need to sleep. I said, I understand that. She said, are you under any more stress than usual? I'm like, no, nothing, more than usual. And she says, well, whatever. So that night, I thought, okay, I'm going to trick my little body. I just, will read downstairs instead of upstairs, and then I'll be so tired when I go to bed. Not a big deal. I'll be ready for sleep. Oh, no. I fell asleep. Hailstorm comes. And I had a client in the driveway when I came home. I work out of my home, and I thought, oh, my gosh, my car's not in the garage. So I go running to the front door, hit a throw rug that I had looked at the day before, and thought, that shouldn't be here. Became a magic carpet ride, and the next thing you know, fractured knee, fractured ankle.
I'm from Kentucky. You know what we do to horses? I'm kidding. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I heard you. Well, guess what? It's a wake-up call again. So when I read your book, it was like, oh, my God, Cynde Meyer, this man understands. It's not avoiding the storms. And that's the beautiful part that you shared so eloquently, to your daughter, to your son, and your own understanding. It's not avoiding the storms. It's how do you deal with what happens. And
embracing it, accepting it. That's
right.
The key. You have a choice. You either resist the gift and you suffer, or you accept the gift and exalt in it. And that was a lesson for me.
So on your website, okay, first of all, listeners, if you're just tagging in, we are listening to Dr. Terry Gordon. His book is No Storm Lasts Forever, Transforming Suffering into Insight. This is one of the most beautiful books on just, here it is. What are you going to do with it? It's a journal that he wrote as he was going through this whole situation, with his son. It starts off with, talking about this event, when his daughter came and was all upset, and he's comforting her, and then the very next moment it was, the universe said, okay, here we go again. And so this book, everyone, buy it, buy several copies, give it as gifts. But I also want to mention the website. The website has all of these amazing articles that Dr. Terry Gordon, which, I'm calling him Terry, but Dr. Terry Gordon, a gifted cardiologist who's now retired but doing so much other work on the front lines. He's written all of these articles, The Wounded Healer, The Body is Only a Temporary Vehicle, the message of No Storm Lasts Forever, how to overcome feelings of being overwhelmed, on and on. He continues to give gifts. Those are all free articles on his site. And, as I said, it's Dr. Terry Gordon, and that's DrTerrygordon.com. This is a Hay House book. Thank you, Louise Hay. Thank you for Wayne Dyer for encouraging you to write this book. But most of all, I just really love how you brought in the Kabbalah teachings, how you give such honor to your wife, such honor to your children, and everything that happened through all of this, and in the titles of your chapters, and we have to talk about Kenny Loggins before we forget. There's just I want this interview to go on forever. I mean, there's just so much in this book. So, you talk about Viktor Frankl. Do you want to talk about, that awareness with that part?
Well, the Kenny Loggins connection.
Okay, let's go there next. Okay.
When you read the book, there was a song that he sang years ago. It appeared on his Back to Pooh Corner album. A beautiful album, and it's one that I listen to whenever I get in turmoil. It always calms me down. But there are songs that he sang to his children. And there was one in there called Cody's Song. And the words just resonated with me, and they really were in the back of my mind the entire time I was writing this book. And I included them in one of the first chapters and one of the last chapters. I hadn't gotten around to asking if I could use the lyrics, but this is, I was in the writing phase. And I was in Lake Charles, Louisiana, visiting my mother, and I had to take her car away from her. So it was not a very pleasant time with my mother. And as I got ready to leave, something happened, and there was this turmoil, and I leaned over to kiss her. And now, she didn't mean this, but she said, "I don't love you. I never want to see you again." So I left a little unsettled. So I'm at the airport in Lake Charles. It's this little podunk airport that you don't go through security until you get ready to board the plane. I got there to find that our plane had been canceled. Our flight had been canceled. And I'm not going back to Mom's apartment, mind you. So I'm going to stay in this airport until we get another flight. Well, 2 or 3 hours later, they found us another airplane. And we're going through security, and this guy behind me says, "Hey, man, I hope this doesn't mess up our connections in Houston." And I turned around to say, well, maybe they're delayed in Houston. And I looked at this guy, and I said, "Man, you look an awful lot like Kenny Loggins." He goes, "Hi, I'm Kenny Loggins." Now, that doesn't just happen. If I could be anybody else in the world, it would be Kenny Loggins. That's how much I love his music and him. And, we started talking, and I told him about the book, and he wrote an endorsement for the book. So, those sorts of things are an affirmation from the universe.
Okay, but wait a minute. We have to talk about Tyler and this song and how, you were singing and he says, "Dad, come on, I want to hear the music."
Well, I like to sing, and there would be some people that say, "This guy can't sing," but I enjoy singing, and at night when I would put him to bed with this, I would sing the song to him. And at one point he said, "Dad, you're running the magic."
And what did this father named Terry Gordon do when his son was in this hospial bed? Figuring out.
I sang the song.
You did.
I did. He was so still, and it was so sad, and that was just what came to mind. I walked in one morning, and I put my hand on his hand, and he was asleep, and I just sang him the song once again.
So these are moments in time that, music opens the heart. It's, when Wayne Dyer in his little introduction to your book, was talking about it's not an accident that Dr. Terry Gordon is a cardiologist working with the heart chakra of all of these people. And, of course, he'd been through his heart attack. He knew how scary it could be. Mm-hmm. Here, the two of you connect on this beach. He encourages you to write this book.
Mm-hmm. It was marvelous. He encouraged me to do the journal. He called every other day when we were in Denver when we got Tyler into rehab. And God love him. He's just is such a marvelous human being. And like I said before, he's changed my life and altered my life and prepared me for what I was about to experience.
Okay, now is it Mike Petra? Do I have Petra? The other person.
Petrus?
Yes, Petrus. Okay.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about this gentleman? I mean, what an inspiration.
Well, Mike was a patient of mine, a heart patient of mine, and, when I retired, it was very sad leaving my patients, and especially those that I felt so close with, and Mike and I always had this very close relationship. And there was a time early on when, the doctors, of course, are saying, there's no hope here. He's never going to walk again. He's going to be quadriplegic the rest of his life. And I believe in miracles. From A Course in Miracles, it says miracles abound all the time. It's when they don't happen that something is wrong. Right. So, I believe that miracles can occur. And I was thinking about that. I was flying home on one of the trips that I had to come home, and I was thinking about miracles. And my cell phone rang, and it was Mike Petrus. And he said, he left a message actually, and it said, if this is the Dr. Terry Gordon, cardiologist, please give me a call. It's your friend Mike Petras. And I had been thinking about him earlier that day because Mike had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And most of us know people don't survive that.
It's so painful.
He went up to the Cleveland Clinic, and they ended up opening him and closing him back up, saying there's nothing they could do. Today, he has no evidence whatsoever of the tumor.
And the minute he heard that, of your plight and challenges, there he was. Just like Wayne Dyer. The minute he heard, there he was. And it's like, you've had these support guides, and you're, getting back to your wife with the belief in angels and her experience, and experiences, I should say, with the angelic realm and constant faith. And, this book, listeners, everybody needs to buy this. It's just so filled with these heart-opening, you're a beautiful writer.
Well, thank you. And I can tell you this, I don't know where that stuff came from. It flowed. I mean, when, I just would get into the zone and I would start seeing things in a totally different, looking at a tree and the bark, and it just flowed through me. So it didn't come from me, I can tell you that. But the book is not just about a kid who's had a spinal cord injury. It relates, I think, universally to anybody who is experiencing loss, whether it's the loss of a loved one, the loss of a spouse, the loss of your job, the loss of your portfolio, or a relationship. All those losses are filled usually with fear, and the key, I think, is finding the beauty in the midst of the belly of the beast. And that's the one thing that I learned. I was in bed one morning when we were out in Colorado, and the sun started, was streaming into the room, and I opened my eyes, and I saw this. It was almost like there was a prism or something in the glass, because there were all these different colors bouncing all over the walls, and I remember thinking, oh, thank you, God, this is such a beautiful day, thank you. And then all of a sudden it hit me where I was, and I went right back into the quagmire, and I felt so guilty that here I was enjoying something. I was enjoying the beauty that morning, when my son couldn't. And I just felt so guilty. And then suddenly I realized it's okay to enjoy the beauty. In fact, we should enjoy the beauty, because it's right there, lying right there alongside the ugliness. And as Lao Tzu describes in the second verse of the Tao Te Ching, there's no duality in life. You can't know darkness without knowing light. You can't know good without bad. They're really one and the same. They're just different ends of the continuum. And it's important that we experience suffering in order to know what peace is like. So
I remember when I first heard that with Buddhism, I was like, what do you mean we have to suffer? I don't, but it's the surrender. It's this surrender, the bittersweet, the yin yang, the dark, the light, and you've continued your work. I do not want to not mention the rest of your work. Here you are. You're a father of these 3 children. You've gone through prostate cancer. You've had this, tragedy blessing with your son, Tyler. And in the middle of all this, look what you continue to advocate. So listeners, after the tragic death of Josh Miller, Dr. Terry Gordon was, you were just touched by it, and you're like, what the heck, and you single-handedly have raised, well, I wouldn't say single-handed, but you know what I mean, your intention, as Wayne Dyer would say, your intention, and through God's direction, you have helped the state of Ohio in 2005 raise over $2.5 million. You saved, for these defibrillators to be, in every junior high and high school. You've then you can convince the state legislature to allocate an additional $2.5 million to complete the task of placing over 4,500 devices in Ohio schools. You've helped over 15,000 people receive training in how to use these devices and CPR, et cetera. So you've raised all of this awareness. And you've saved, I mean, is it like 15 kids already? That
It's at least 15. Yeah.
Right,
But you know,
yeah.
Cynde, it's not very often that God puts something in front of you and says, go with it. And that's what happened when Josh first passed away. He passed away in the year 2000, so I've been on this mission for 12 years now.
Wow.
And I saw the video of his death, and it was the most sickening thing I've ever seen. In that normally boisterous stadium, you could hear a pin drop, except for the wail of his mother. And it's a sound that continues to reverberate in my soul. And that's when we came up with the idea in our county to put them in the junior and high schools. And then after we did that, we thought, well, let's not stop there. How about Ohio? And it was kind of an interesting story because I went to D.C. to help lobby with another father who had lost his son to cardiac arrest. And it became very clear very quickly that on a national level this wasn't going to happen. And it was on the plane trip back home that I was meditating and praying to God, you know, I've got all this energy. Show me the way. And this man, his vision came into my consciousness. That's who I was to approach. And then I called him the next morning and asked if I could come talk to him, and he said, okay. And I went over there, and I started telling him the stories of all these kids who had died. And about halfway through, he gently closed the booklet on my hand that had all the pictures of these kids. And he said, you know, Terry, you don't need to convince me. Cut to the chase. What do you need? Took a deep breath. I said, I need $5 million. And he said, okay, here's how we're going to do it. And it unfolded exactly the way I saw it in my vision on the airplane coming home. The day that we completed that initiative, my U.S. Congresswoman, Betty Sutton, called me and said, you know, Terry, do you think we could do this on a national level? And I said, no, ma'am, I don't think we can. And I remember her sighing and saying, oh, why not? And I said, because I know we can. And this was before Wayne's book, The Power of Intention, came out. But that's what I was practicing. I already saw this and see this program as already being there. And, you know, it was first proposed in 2008 and passed the U.S. House of Representatives unanimously, but didn't make it through the Senate. It was reproposed again in 2009 and again didn't make it through the Senate. So it's been reproposed for a third time. The travesty is this, that since the bill first passed, the Josh Miller Hearts Act, first passed the U.S. House of Representatives in June of 2008, 206 children have died of a cardiac arrest in our schools. It's nauseating.
It's tragic.
And the worst part of this is if you walk through the halls of Congress, you walk through the offices of the senators and House of Representatives, guess what they have hanging on their walls? AEDs everywhere. So the bill will pass. I already see it as being, and
if Spirit Seeker can help in any way, I mean, you know, I mean, all three of my kids are athletes. You know, it's you know, the heart is, you know, we know, you know, things happen, and you can shock it back in. You know, there's arrhythmias. There's just so many things that happen with our athletes. And
well, every 6 days a child dies of a cardiac arrest. Every 6 days. So it's something.
But your work, you know, your work is multi-reaching, and you know, I know that you're retired now, but here you are. Your work is continuing, and you know, I love how on your website it says that, you know, Terry's purposeful life is to continue serving by sharing with others his insight to what we all desire: peace, shalom, salam.
That's right. It's what we all need.
In the middle of the storm, you know, it's like you can't avoid them. They're part of, you know, I mean, I live in the Midwest. We're used to these floods. We're used to tornadoes. We're used to, like, you know, these bizarre things that happen. And, you know, and you look at New Orleans almost being wiped off the map. And, you know, you look at all these tragedies. You know, these things happen. Mother Nature has a force of her own, and there's always a reason. You know, there's not necessarily a reason. You go crazy if you try and figure out the reason. But the point is that it's here. What are you going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do?
You either resist it or you accept it. You know, was it Ernest Hemingway that said, life breaks us all, but some of us are stronger in the broken places? I think those of us who find that peace, who can find that meaning in it, and it doesn't come right away. You know, it takes patience. It takes time to fully understand what has happened and perhaps why. You know, there are instances certainly where you'll never know why. But if you know that it's in perfect order, then there is a lesson in there hidden somewhere. And there's no such thing as a tragedy. The tragedy is only a calamity if you decide to make it so. And
right.
And the tragic thing is not learning from an experience. That's the tragedy.
Well, and as you share the wise words of Rabbi David Horowitz, who imparted, this wisdom to you, each of us travels through life on our own unique path. Perhaps we have a particular goal or destination in mind. But what we find is that often the trip itself teaches us more than we might have ever expected. The journey becomes more important than reaching the ultimate destination.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
It is. One of the things that I've tried to explain and describe, and often I don't do it very well, is that what happens to us is not important. In other words, I'll give you an example. My father died of prostate cancer. My children never knew him, and they didn't know he died of prostate cancer. They just knew he at some point had died. So prostate cancer to them is totally irrelevant. Now to him, it was very important, not because it was prostate cancer, but because of what he did with it. So what we get, and we're all going to get something, what we get, I don't believe is important. It's what we do with it that is important.
I studied with a Qigong. She was Dr. Effie Childs. She was just named the International Qigong Master Teacher of the International. She got the International Award. And I had the privilege and honor of studying with her. I was just barely out of the wheelchair. It was in April of this year. And, I've studied Qigong. But, I thought, what? I felt so drawn to her. And I took her class. And there was a lady there from Chicago who basically was told there's nothing that could be done. That, she had ovarian cancer. She was a playwright, and just an amazing playwright. And she was living with her sister and brother-in-law because she had to give up her apartment and everything. I mean, stage 4 cancer, nothing. And her sister and brother-in-law said, there's this Qigong lady coming in the middle of Missouri in this little tiny college town, Columbia, Missouri. And how she happened to get there is that someone took a class in some larger city. She's from San Francisco, and they said, I wish you'd come, to Missouri and teach us. And she says, I've never been to Missouri. So here she is. She's teaching this class in the middle of cornfields. Farmers and everything came to her introductory lecture. And what she said to all of us, 2 things. One thing she said, if you have cancer, make it your friend. Mm-hmm. Whatever happens in your life, make it your friend. It's there for a reason. Don't resist it. Just make it your friend and get to know it very well and learn everything that you can from it and love whatever it is that's happened to help you learn from this experience. And then she took this Sharon person who had the stage 4 cancer and put her in the circle of all of us. And, I've sent energy. I've done energy healing for almost, 25, 30 years now, in one form or another. But she had all of us, eyes open, send love and energy and chi to this woman. And she had her eyes open and received this love and energy from all of us. And it was life-changing for every single person in that room. And afterwards, this playwright who has this voice that is just, so strong, she said, you have all changed my life. When I read this book, No Storm Lasts Forever, Transforming Suffering into Insight, I thought, you know what? You're going to help so many people through this work. I know you've helped all kinds of people as a doctor. Your patients are still grateful to you. But your 4 children, your wife, and all the other people who feel, I felt like I saw inside your family. It's just, you're just so kind and loving to allow us to have the privilege of being on this journey with you through this book. It's not an accident you ran into Wayne Dyer. It's not an accident that you ran into Kenny Lyons. It's not an accident that, you have helped so many. This is part of your life purpose, Dr. Terry Gordon, and you're doing an amazing job. And I cannot thank you enough for being my guest tonight. Thank you for allowing, your publicist, that I adore, by the way, to allow us to publish, your article and arrange this interview. Just thank you for the work you're doing. I'm, from my heart to yours.
It's been a total pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, Cynde. So God bless you and namaste.
Okay, namaste. DrTerryGordon.com. Until next week, thank you so much. And listeners, I know you're going to find your way. Either you were here live or you'll find your way. Forward the link. Let other people be inspired by the wisdom that was offered on the show tonight. Thank you so much. Okay. Good night.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.